Hi guys, I'm back again today with another reaction video, and today we're checking out a buy me a coffee request. This was Yuam. So thank you for the request, and this is political liberalism. I cannot pronounce R and L in the same word like fluidly, so I have to like really stop and cut the words into syllables before I can pronounce it. I don't know. My brain doesn't understand how to do that yet, even if I'm super old yet already. But anyways, it's kind of like darker because my light just died on us today, and I only have one, so that is why I'll buy when I get back. So yes, I'm going to split this video into two parts. Tomorrow you will see the next part. We're gonna have finished. We're gonna do 30 minutes. So before we do start, don't forget to subscribe, click the bell button, and let's go straight into the video. I know, right? It's kind of dark. Oh, okay. So liberalism is to know the first principles, basic history of liberalism. This is, I think, the topic. To compare Islamic traditionalism and liberal contractarianism, to be able to make a to be able to make judgments, supposedly, based on those comparisons.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing, and welcome to the
When was
sixth
this
session
uploaded?
of the sharh or the explanation of
A
Londoniyyah.
year ago,
So inshallah we're going to be talking about liberalism, in particular the political strand of liberalism. So we're going to listen to the poem inshallah ta'ala, and then we are going to come back and start discussing the issues.
فصل في الليبرالية السياسية. وأصل هذا عقد اجتماعي، والمرء طائع لأي داعي دعا له الدستور والقانون، وإن أبى فإنه مسجون. والمسلمون يسمعون أمرا ممن عليهم تولى أمرا، ثم ترى جماعة الليبرال بكل جرأة على المقال بأننا رجعية نقطع لسارق وللكفور نقطع، فكيف أوجبوا على من حكموا أن يسمعوا قانونهم وألزموا، ثم أتوا لنقد حكم المسلم أما رأوا قبيحهم في العالم.
Right. So inshallah today what we're going to be doing is we're going to go back to a little bit of epistemology and liberal epistemology for that matter, and we're going to quickly go through some of the historical points, because in the last session we did cover some of the philosophical points, especially with social liberalism, but it's important to tie this in with some of the history. And then we're going to talk about human rights, because human rights clearly is an idea which is connected to liberalism. We're going to spend some time on this idea actually, because it's important for us to know what they mean by it. What are the human rights in the convention, the 30 human rights? We're going to kind of cover those. When did they become popular? And then we're going to look at the social contract, which is a very big part of political liberalism, or al-aqd al-ijtima'i, as the poem refers to it as. And we'll make some comparisons between the social contract in Islamic political theory, if you want to put it that way, and also between contractarianism in liberalism. So that's really what we're going to go through today. So let's start off with some of the epistemological stuff that we spoke about last lesson, to kind of interleave, if you like, what we studied in the previous session with what we are studying in this session. So what are some of the principles that facilitate the liberal framework? Some of the things that liberalism is predicated on. My friend here, what's some of the principles? What do liberals assume?
We could say the hedonistic principle.
Yes. The what principle?
Fruit fly.
Hedonistic principle. Yeah, the hedonistic principle.
We live, basically, we have two laws, pain and
yes.
pleasure. Good.
Right. So this you're bringing it to Bentham, but it's connected, right? So the idea that, you know, you got these visceral desires, or you have these kind of inclinations and whatever, and that you should be allowed to enact those inclinations. You should be allowed to do those things that you want to do. What other things did we speak about in the previous session, which is relevant here? some of the principles, some of the premises of liberalism.
Utilitarianism?
All right, so with social liberalism, right, you're right, social liberalism, utilitarianism, there's connection there. The connection is, we talked about J.S. Mill and how he kind of put the harm principle in place and so on in order to avoid this kind of anarchical state. So we spoke about that. But you know, it's really interesting as well, because if you look at John Locke in particular, if you look at where he was seen as, some consider him the founder of liberalism, and this is an interesting point. Who is the founder, or who is the first liberal, if you like?
Yeah.
So some say it's Thomas Hobbes. He wrote a book called The Leviathan, and we'll talk about him today actually. He had his own kind of theoretical constructions. Some say it might be John Locke. And when John Locke, who died in 1706 or something like this, when John Locke was making his argument for liberalism, he was debating against someone called Filmer. This Filmer, I think it's Robert Filmer, was another person who was obviously a Christian as well. And so a lot of the arguments used to actually be theological arguments. So really interestingly, a lot of the points of liberalism, and that you find in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and other documents in the American kind of political landscape, you'll find we are born equal. These kinds of terminologies here. We are created equal, even religious language. Why? Because religion, and in particular Christian religion, or Judeo-Christian religion, or the Judeo-Christian tradition, was a significant way in which liberals in the beginning actually formed their epistemology. This idea of being created equal. I mean, how are we created equal when we're all different? In what sense are we equal? Because they're not talking about we're equal in skin color, or equal in height, or equal in socioeconomic standing, because we're not equal in any of those things. In fact, some people are born disabled, some people are born able, you know, with extra testosterone or whatever it may be. So there are disparities in a biological sense. So in what sense are we born or created equal? What's referred to here is really we're equal in value, that we're all equal, you know, in how moral standing, if you like. But where did they get that from? Because we can't really argue that point unless you invoke some kind of metaphysical principle. So John Locke was invoking, at that time, a religious metaphysical principle, making specific reference, believe it or not, to Adam and Eve and the book of Genesis and these things. So tradition, or Judeo-Christian tradition, has a huge impact on the liberal tradition. It has a theology. It's not just hedonism, but ironically you could say, because religion is in many senses self-restricting, right? It's also religion, and so there's an interesting interplay between those two things. So, just to quickly go through some of the main things. You had the English Civil War, which if you went to I don't know, secondary school in this country, you'd have covered. Okay, that's from the years 1641, 1651. Then you have the Bill of Rights in 1689. Now these.
I don't even think did I ever come across English Civil War? I probably did in my reactions, to be honest, on my other channel, because I reacted to a lot of I forget the name of that channel, but they do like a animation of like Civil War, the American, the Cold War, and all that stuff. So probably I came across it there, I'm not sure. But in school, of course not, because we learn a lot about America, but not a lot about the English stuff. And of course, we will learn a lot about our own country.
These Bill of Rights, a lot of them, when they were being formulated, actually used John Locke's ideas. Okay, he was around at that time. So John Locke, he was directly responsible for some of the formulations, the political formulations, which happened not just obviously in England, but also in America, as we know. A lot of the stuff there, you know, the founding documents, if you like, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, all these kind of things, they were based on Locke. They were based on Montesquieu and Locke as well. So we mentioned that. Rousseau was a huge name as well. In 1778 he was around. And then of course in 1789 you had the French Revolution, And the documents that are related to that revolution are, in fact,
It's so funny that my knowledge of history is mostly through reactions, to be honest. I don't think I learned anything in history class, or I don't remember anything from my history class. But I do remember because some of the things because of our reactions. It's crazy. Those names sound so familiar to me.
many of them are based on the works, the political works of John Locke and of Montesquieu, and are liberally premised or predicated. Immanuel Kant was a big name, and he was also a liberal, but he also put in place something called cosmopolitanism, which is an interesting universalizing idea. Like the UN actually comes from this idea that liberalism
really?
should be spread around. Like liberalism should be spread around. Now, not all liberals will say this, and we have to be very, very clear and careful with this, because cosmopolitanism is a sub-branch of liberalism. It's not the only branch of liberalism. But how do liberals justify expansion, or in America what they refer to as manifest destiny? And this idea of manifest destiny is westward expansion, literally westward expansion. When they went to the natives and stuff, they were literally expanding, conquering new land and so on. It's interesting that most, if not all, presidents in the United States believe in this concept of manifest destiny, and there are articles written on this point. But it's westward expansion, and manifest destiny is the idea that we are going to take over, to put it in a word. It's almost destiny. It is destiny that we will take over.
We will manifest
our liberal
that
framework.
as our destiny.
And this idea is connected, of course, to Immanuel Kant's idea of cosmopolitanism. So it's important to know these different kinds of permutations of liberalism. And we talked about Mill last time, so we don't need to go into too much detail about him now, but he was a key formulator, of course, of social liberalism. And then you have World War I and World War II. And World War II in particular was very important because obviously after World War II in 1945, you had the UN, which was previously known as the League of Nations. It changed name. It was called the League of Nations. And then in 1939 to 1945, it changed name to the UN. And that's when a lot of the documents that we're going to be looking at today, like the UN Convention of Human Rights, that's when they were written. They were written on a post-war basis. And why they were written is to ensure, world stability and these kinds of things. The League of Nations, remember, before even World War II, was established to create that kind of peace treaties between nations and so on. So we're going to look at the Human Rights Declaration, which was written at the same time as Israel became a state in 1948. Now, let's talk about human rights. When I say human rights, what comes to your mind? What comes to your mind if someone says human rights? What's the first thing what connotation that brings about? Is it a positive connotation, let's be honest, or negative? If you say it's positive, what other things come to mind?
Freedom of speech, freedom of movement.
Yes.
Legalistic way and universal way.
Equality, yeah.
Definitely.
These kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Anything else come to mind?
Freedom of religion as well.
Freedom of religion. What's the opposite of rights? Responsibilities. It's very interesting. It's not human responsibilities. It's what? It's human rights. It's not even human rights and responsibilities. It's just human rights. And why is that significant? That it's not human rights and responsibilities, or human responsibilities, but human rights. Why is that significant? What does it mean to have rights?
It has to be someone's responsibility to provide those rights for you.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, of course. But what does it mean in the first place to have rights?
Are you entitled to something?
Yeah, that you're entitled to something. You're owed something. But what does it not mean by extension?
You tell us.
That you need to attain it.
That you need to attain it, okay, but something else which is more diametrically opposed to the word rights. That you need to, let's use the word give and take.
Yeah.
All right, rights is what? Taking or giving? Taking. So responsibilities are what? Giving. If you tell people in a society, take these things, and you don't tell them, give these things, what happens? What's the problem?
It's not reciprocal, so.
You're not contributing anything back.
What could happen, theoretically? Let's put it in more precise language.
Is not going to want to provide those rights for you. Or,
Well, if everyone's doing it, you have the freeloader problem. You have diffusion of responsibility,
Yeah.
right? Imagine if you're raising children, yeah, and you told them you have a right to eat this, and you have a right to do that, and you have a right to do this, and but you don't discipline them. You don't tell them this is what you have to do, this is what you should do, this is what kind of children are you, what kind of children are you gonna raise?
I take advantage.
Yeah, and this is one of the arguments against liberalism and by extension human rights culture, that it produces individualism to a very high level, diffusion of responsibility. Like this just on a side note, this thing of diffusion of responsibility, right? There have been psychological investigations done on it. Like someone commits rape, yeah, and stranger rape, and it's happening in the street, and the woman is screaming, and for some reason no one's even calling the police. They're too busy eating pot noodles or you know, or chewing gum or something like that, or playing games, computer games. The woman is screaming outside. It might be at night time, but whatever, like, you know, we'll drown it out because I'm busy. You know, so this culture or this psychological phenomena, which is referred to as diffusion of responsibility. Let someone else deal with it. But it's not my business. I don't have to do that. It's not my obligation to do that. Why? Because you've already instilled in the person that it's not they've got rights and they've got responsibilities. But their rights are important. It's a human right for me to do what I want. Who cares about this person here? You know?
That's so inhumane, though.
We'll come to this. In fact, it's very important, very, very important. Criticism of individualism within liberalism.
Because if you as a person are going to use the excuse of human rights to not help somebody in need, then how do you expect it to be reciprocated back to you? But we'll see. Maybe this will give us a epiphany about the situation. Because, of course, this is breathing those kind of people, individualism, right? It's breathing those kind of people. But as myself, looking at it, obviously, if something is wrong, I want to know, like, because if something around you is happening, it means that you're closer to target, meaning like if that happens to somebody close to you, you're next, right? And obviously, you want to resolve the situation, you want to help the person, of course, also, and you want to hopefully think that when that happens to you, somebody will help you as well, right? Am I making sense? I don't know. Sometimes that's why I try not to talk, because I feel like I have a point, but I don't know how to articulate it properly. So I try to avoid, but I can't avoid speaking, but I try, because I think I make myself sound dumber than I would like to.
You know? And so we'll come to this. In fact, it's very important, very, very important. Criticism of individualism within liberalism, referred to as communitarianism. And one of the main, well, let me give you two names. Some of the main names is Michael Sandel, who, by the way, he has an 11 or 12-part series in Harvard. It's called The Justice. Probably one of the best series that you can watch, yeah, on these topics, to increase your knowledge on these areas. Because he teaches it very well, and it's very lucid, very clear, very clean. So people ask for book recommendations. Start with this lecture series, because it's a very high quality lecture series. Michael Sandel, Harvard lecture series. It's been watched by millions and millions of people, and the production quality of it is second to none. Yeah, but he also writes a book called Theories of Justice, and he offers a communitarian criticism of individualism, which we'll explore in maybe some more detail in what follows. But let's talk about rights now a little bit more. When you're talking about rights, human rights, it's already universalized. Okay. So these are the rights that all humans have. Okay, so it's not exceptional. It's not categorized, or these rights for these people, and these are rights for other people.
It's
Now, obviously, with
everyone.
the purpose of equality, all of that makes sense. But then we talk about relationships in families. Is the mother and the father the same as the son and the daughter? Well, for them, I mean, you'll read, and we'll go through this together, the 30 human rights. One of them isn't mother's rights. It's you don't have a rights for mothers in this formulation. Mothers are not separated and made in any way exceptionalized. They're not exceptionalized. Yeah, the category of mother is drowned out in the transcendental category of human. Human is more important than mother. Mother is of no special significance in the 30.
But is it
right
mother
formulation.
human?
Should we give like in Islam, obviously we have the idea of ummaka thumma ummaka thumma ummaka thumma ummaka thumma ummaka thumma ummaka thumma abak, you know, your mother, your mother, your mother, your father. Your mother is so important, then your father is important. Now, if these are kinds of traditional notions, not just in Islam, you have these notions in human rights? Not really. So what do we find in these countries? You'll find, you know, care homes with a lot of people in them dying of COVID right now because their children don't think they have the right to a special treatment from kids because the parents are, you know, they're just humans and there's no special rights given to parents. It's not inculcated in the culture. It's just something that's, well, why should I take care of them? You see, but if you have a culture which says, actually, the mother, you know, is so important, and how could you just leave your mother
parent.
to die in a care home, or that's a different paradigm altogether. When did human rights as a phrase become popular? Human rights became popular, as you'd probably imagine, after 1948, because before that they were using the term natural rights.
Oh, it started.
And Bentham, he referred to this term as nonsense on stilts, he said. He didn't like it. Bentham, you know, the utilitarian, he didn't like it. He referred to it as nonsense on stilts. But anyway, at the very least, after 1945, the term became very popular. And I've sent something called, and this is a very good, it's called Google Ngram. You look at it and it's like how much a word has been used in books throughout the ages. I think I've given you the old slides actually. What I wanted to do at this time, we'll pause. What I want to do before we move on to the state of nature, which is a secondary kind of thing that we're going to look at, is I want us to look at the human rights, 30 points of human rights, the 30 articles, yeah? And I want us just to think about continuities and discontinuities. What are some of the things which are patterns in human rights? And what are some of the things which are discontinuous in human rights? And then we'll come back and we'll see some of the things that we've looked at. It's important for us to know what the human rights are, in fact. And for extra points, if you've done that, then the second thing we look at is we look at some major debates that are happening in today's society and how some of the human rights are being either overutilized or underutilized. If you want even more points, a third question is, are there any tensions between human rights? Meaning, could you conceivably see contradictions between the so-called rights that exist within the 30 articles? So just to summarize the 3 points.
How do you call it? Was it in high school or college? I don't remember when I first got introduced to human rights. Probably in high school. My brain is less and less each and every day. It's getting worse. But who cares? The most important thing is I do remember that I don't know if we discussed this or I just saw it and I was like, but yeah, there are some contradictions. I cannot think of them, but if we see the list, we probably will find some.
Points. Just general continuities and discontinuities. 1.
Maybe
Number 2, where some of these rights become relevant
studies
in public discourse. And the third thing is, if there are any tensions that may exist within those 30 human rights, and we'll come back for kind of brainstorming and so on. So let's start, inshallah ta'ala, with the first question that what was the first question that we had? What are some of the continuities and discontinuities with the 30 articles of human rights?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
The big one that we noticed was basically one of the rights is the right to democracy.
Yes, yes.
And that's one that can, very easily there can be a tension with all of the other ones, because, if you have a right to democracy and the democratic will is to go against, any of the other 29 articles.
Give me an example of another 29 article which democracy goes against. Just one example.
Or could potentially go against.
Yeah.
So, for example, the freedom of thought and religion. So if the democratic will, for instance, is to, take rights away from, say, the Muslim community or the Christian community, or to say you can't have halal meat, or you can't wear hijab, or you can't do all of those things, and you immediately have a tension there.
Okay, yes, but is this freedom of religion that you're speaking about, is it implemented on a state level? Or are you talking about on the individual level?
I don't understand the question.
So, for example, if we talk about a Muslim country which is trying to implement Islamic laws, for example, and where democracy goes against, for example, it says that in the constitution in Saudi Arabia that cutting the hand of the thief is, and then they democratically vote against that. Or are we talking about a situation where in a country like Britain or USA, someone's religious right is to pray 5 times a day, but then the majority of democratic voters go against that?
Yeah, so the second case.
Yeah, okay, okay. Give me another example. That was good. That's a very good point, in fact. Democracy is a bit of a double-edged sword, and it can be self-explosive in the same way that we talked about intersectionality and feminism can be implode upon itself. What other thing, apart from freedom of religion, what can go against democracy or the democratic will of the people?
So it says here.
Yeah.
Right 6. It says you have rights no matter where you go. So let's just say if you go a country, a Muslim country, where the majority.
I can't really hear the people at the back, so I have to volume.
They
That's
don't
all.
want LGBT, and you're a person that are pro-LGBT, or you are LGBT, pro-LGBT. You have a problem there, because it's a country that.
Say that again. Sorry,
I
one more
can't
time.
hear,
So
sorry.
you go a country where democratically they decided that LGBT rights are not part of their
Right.
the law, and it says here that you are wherever you go, you have a right.
So, isn't there a right for sexual orientation?
So what he said is, what if you are an LGBT and you go to a country that doesn't something? I cannot really hear him, to be honest. I just hear like keywords and I just run with that and make my own assumptions of what he's trying to say.
It says I'm a person just like you. So
No, but is there because your example was about homosexuality, right, or
No, but
LGBT?
Yeah, so it can be homosexuality, it can be anything else.
Yeah,
so
okay.
If like you mentioned, cutting the hand for.
Yeah.
So if you think that the thieves shouldn't be cut off, then and you go to a country where you live in a country where democratically they decided that is alright. That's
Yes.
Then you have a problem there. I feel.
Great, that's true. This is right. I mean, a more fundamental one is right to life. Isn't that there? I'm sure it's there, right? Right to life is a very foundational liberal principle. Like right to wealth, life, wealth, and what's the other one that they talk about? Yeah. That's another formulation. Property, yes, yeah.
Isn't that contradictory to with like abortion laws and stuff like that?
Could be argued, but more fundamentally, right? Death penalty. I mean, in the United States, how many states have got the death penalty? So there's a tension here, because it's like, does this person have a right to his life or not? Or does she have a right to her life or not? What if, as you say, you have a situation where a country democratically elects or democratically votes for a death penalty? 99% of the population say, we want the death penalty. So now there's a democratic mandate for the death penalty, but then there's a tension with life. Because what is the construction liberal democracy?
Is the human rights to the right of life or whatever, however it's stated, is there an underlying like context, like, okay, you have the right to live if da 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 da, and you don't have if it is democratically voted that you can't because you committed? Is it like specified? Are we just taking it as the headline, the title, the bullet point of the human rights? Or are we going to read into it even more and see that there is more context to it? Or is this how the human rights is presented and there's no context? Let me know in the comments.
Democracy,
I don't
we often assume that these two things are always conciliatory and that they work together and harmonious. But what's sometimes difficult is you have issues where democracy dictates X, but liberalism dictates Y, and they are contradictory. And who's going to arbitrate that? You see, this is a very important question, because if we say, well, the state arbitrates it, then you have to justify that, and you can justify that through the social contract, which we're going to cover. But if you say, well, the individuals are going to arbitrate that, then we have democracy over representation. Anyway, we'll come to this, and these are tensions. These are tensions that are difficult to arbitrate, basically. And
it's really hard to kind of like find a way to like make it work, or to find like a perfect harmony of stuff.
So in other words, we should note that human rights are not always consistent with one another. We always say, we talk about human rights as if they're monolithic and if they all go together and they're all in one direction, but sometimes there's serious conflicts and contradictions that a liberal democrat must endure. These they must endure them. Any other contributions before we move on to the next part of this session?
If you had a democracy,
yes,
and then they just voted on something like a law which goes against any of the laws here, then you just have an immediate contradiction. Isn't
exactly. That's a good way of putting it.
Okay.
If you have a democracy which goes against any of the human rights, then you have an immediate contradiction, because democracy is one of the human rights.
Yeah.
You have an immediate contradiction. And how do you endure that contradiction? How do you resolve that contradiction? How do you arbitrate that contradiction? Then you have to make arguments. But are you going to make an argument where you favor democracy over liberalism?
Yeah.
Or are you going to make an argument where you're going to favor liberalism over democracy? Yes?
How do you measure human rights? Because it's very interesting, because how do you measure when someone
I think
says,
he
when a
talked
liberal
about
says,
it briefly a
this
while
person
ago.
has the freedom to do so, this A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So the thing is, for example, how do you measure it? So for example, pornography, they don't class it as
this
some kind of a
Dawah?
drug because
His
they
voice.
don't see that effects, but we know pornography actually destroys. There's even a charity, well, not charity, an organization called Pornography Destroys Lives. So how do they measure it?
So the idea of pornography is less about human rights and more about utilitarianism that we spoke about last lesson, where you can make an argument on utilitarianism that pornography has more damaging effect on a society than it has a positive effect. It has more harm than it has good. Yeah, human rights are not really concerned with this kind of thing. Unless we're talking about sexual exploitation, human trafficking and these kinds of things. It would actually, I mean, if we're being completely honest, pornography should be allowed on this paradigm, because pornography is freedom of expression. It should be allowed on freedom. But if you want to make an argument within the paradigm against pornography, you wouldn't use human rights, you'd use utilitarianism. You'd say, well, if you guys believe that's great is good for the greatest number, you believe in harm principles, so on, then you can make an argument that pornography is correlated to rape, is correlated to this, is exploitation. And pornography has been argued against not by liberals per se, but in fact by feminists and by second wave feminists. We talked about this before. It was called the sex wars in the 1980s and 90s, the feminist sex wars. And you have people like Andreas Dagian on the one side. She was a radical feminist who vehemently, attacked the pornography industry. So there was some people within feminism that vehemently attacked, making arguments similar, like exploitation, to what we would make, exploitation, objectification, and so on. So it's not like you cannot find arguments, but I wouldn't use human rights for that. I would use, if you wanted to find an argument for pornography, a moral argument, it would be through utilitarianism and or these conceptions within the second wave paradigm of feminism. Of course, you can make a range of other arguments outside those paradigms as well, but if you're speaking to a feminist and you don't want to convert her to Islam before she agrees with you, then you can work within her paradigm. If you're speaking to a liberal, then you work within their paradigm just to get them to be convinced of that particular point. But it's a difficult case to make on liberalism. It is a, I have to be honest, if we're being completely honest, it's a difficult case to make on liberalism because it would seem to be in line with freedom of expression. All right, let's talk about something very important. This, there's something called the state of nature. Okay, now this is a very important thing in liberal theory. So you might think that, and I usually say this in this language, that mythology is confined to the spheres of kind of religion and this kind of things. But much of political philosophy is predicated on mythology, like genuine mythology. Genuine. When I say myth, I'm talking about narratives which have no basis in the real world.
I mean, that's what
Like
a
we
myth
said,
is.
one of the people that have been said to be the founders of liberalism, although there is some scholarly disagreement about this, is a man called Thomas Hobbes. And we talked about his book called The Leviathan. And in this book, and other books that he writes, he refers to something called the state of nature. Now, what is the state of nature? The state of nature for him is a fictitious state. Okay, it's not something which is, he went out with his psychologist friends and he went out to see how human beings are, and he started to say, well,
State of
human beings
nature.
exhibit X, Y, Z trait, and therefore the human beings are like this by nature.
So it was like a mythological idea that he presented to the people without fact checking, without doing his surveys or research. So I was gonna say, I forget the name of that book though. It's Human Nature.
He didn't do that. He didn't do the work of a cognitive psychologist or cognitive scientist and say this is how human beings are born before socialization. He didn't do any of that. He said that human beings basically
And against
are warring by nature. So everyone's fighting each other. So everyone's attacking each other by nature. Okay, it's a clashing environment. Everyone's clashing by nature. Yes, and this is the original state. The original state is everyone's fighting each other. Everyone's beating each other up. And he says, so what was initially required in order to stop this chaos is you needed people who are beating each other up and clashing and conflicting with each other. What was that name of the book that they study in GCSEs? That, you know, the Lord of the Flies. Yeah, what's the guy's name that wrote it? Yes. You studied that in GCSEs, did you? Yeah. Did you? Yeah. I used to teach it for GCSEs when I used to teach English. Lord of the Flies. This is based on Hobbesian characterizations.
Could you say that Mad Max kind of
Okay, we're gonna end it here today, and then we'll continue tomorrow with the rest of the video. This is a very interesting topic because I don't know a lot when it comes to liberalism, right? Or any of the isms there is. To be honest, when it comes to utilitarianism and all that stuff, maybe because I was not necessarily as interested when I was in school, when these topics were like thrown in my face, I would do my part as a student to just memorize it, not necessarily digest it by understanding. I would just memorize the points, like this is the definition of that, this is the definition of that. But did I digest it properly to the point of understanding? No, I just wanted to pass my test, get a good mark, and then go about my day. It was not necessarily a key point of interest for me. So I don't know a lot on this topic, right? Especially when it comes to certain places, certain countries. It will be far for me to understand, right? Maybe I'll understand the law or the situation much more here in the Philippines than US, UK, and other parts of the world. But yeah, it's interesting because it should have been something that it's not should, it should be something that we are focused on because it is dealing with our existence, it's dealing with our life. So yeah, we should be concerned about that, right? But anyways, let me know what you guys thought. If there's other key points that you want to point out in the comments, let me know down. If you like the video, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.